As promised, I'm back with another perspective. If you enjoy this show, you can check out the weather show, which I do Monday through Friday at 5 o'clock Mountain Time. And we just wander around the world and see what is of interest, and especially stateside, where we usually have a lot going on. All right, here's how to contact or connect with me. Metadime Digital co.com. Another perspective podcast is where to get audio recordings of these, and of course they're on YouTube as well. My channel is Weather Wars, but also at Metadime Digital. Facebook, Scott.Stevens.2021 is the show page rather than my personal profile page, and then Instagram at Scott Stevens 2891, and then the website we're working on is scottstevens.co. All right, going to talk about the reset today. We all know big changes are coming. This is kind of a given. We can feel it, we can sense it, and as we've talked about in past episodes, I think we're all born with an anticipation of being here for these coming events, that we are of a caliber of person to which we can rise to the occasion to contribute in a positive way. But without seeing that potential outcome, it's very easy to get lost in the minutia of the day, the minutia of the story, the news of the evening, or the chaos of where your friends and family reside. It's difficult to hold that anchor and hold true to what you believe you are, or what you believe is to be true. And even then, with so much rampant censorship and controlling of the narrative, the question always arises as to what is true. All right, so let's move on to this. We'll start with this, a Memory Hole 101. We talked about this on Monday in the show called Is It Fake or Might It Even Be Real? We don't know till afterwards. So we'll come into this. And we had an incident just today where the word preference was memory hold. And it had happened when we have a senator from Hawaii, Senator Hirono, was asking the Supreme Court nominee Amy Coney Barrett about sexual preference. And just to bring this up, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was just passed away well into her 80s, and had used the term sexual preference back in 2017, but apparently Hirono jumped on Amy Coney Barrett for saying on Tuesday that the term was offensive and outdated. So really, I mean, I wasn't aware of this, and being a man with a sexual preference, that's just always the way the term has been. I think we all have a preference one way or another, whether it be bisexual, homosexual, or straight. There is a preference. So, as recently as last month, Webster's dictionary included a definition of preference as orientation, at least in that terms. And all of a sudden, today it was changed to include the term reference. So we have these goalposts that are constantly moving. And this goes back to memory hole, where the story is adjusted, altered to approach and to conform to the narrative of the day. So on today's story, which will it be? Build it back better? Or are we going to go through a force quit? And those of you that are Apple users, we know the term force quit. Command Q is when you command the program that is running to quit, and then we'll restart it up. And the question is, do we force quit, or is it built back better? The other thing is, are we to the point where for Windows users, are we at a blue screen moment? All right, this comes back to Ryan McShane, shared with me a couple of episodes back, and I just thought it was appropriate to share. So hat trick to Ryan here. Government behavior and corruption. Well, let's just start with this. He thinks most people are alarmed by, and then we're going to go through the list. Government behavior and corruption, simply because that's the way it is. Today's pharmacological healthcare model, but that's the way it is. Religious leaders' behavior, but that's the way it is. Debt-based financial systems. Once again, that's the way it is. A two-tiered justice system. We're all familiar with that. If you have money, you can afford a different justice system. If you have a different skin color, you can afford a different system of justice. Racism and inequality. but that's the way it is. The intrusion of government in our personal lives and choices, but that's the way it is. The lack of privacy in a digital world, but that's the way it is. The rise of cancel culture, but that's the way it is. The lack of logic displayed by leaders and supposed authority figures, but that's the way it is. The censoring of most things outside of the mainstream narrative, we've come to accept that that's the way it is. The amount of selfish behavior by those in positions of power, we also have accepted that as being the way it is. The amount of negativity perpetuated on social media, we too daily accept that that's the way it is. The lack of authenticity and transparency in positions of authority, we have allowed that to become the way it is. The extent to which hate has given attention over love, we have accepted it that that's just the way it is. Discovering most of what we've been told about how the world works was based on a narrative created by those who would control you. And once again, but that's just the way it is. And what will it take to stop accepting the unacceptable? And thank you for those, Ryan. All right, so we have to begin by looking at how we gather information, how we take the pool of data presented to us that it's at the bottom of the ladder. So today's ever-growing memory holes via social media platforms and other digital platforms are deleting, denying access to data and information, which then forms the basis of individual and personal observations. That simply is the first rung of the ladder. How we see and then begin to process that first bit of data, something I see with my eyes. I step out in the morning, I assess the weather situations. From that observation, that bit of data, what does it mean for me? That means I can make an assumption about how to dress, and a conclusion is then made that I can believe I can go to work without an umbrella, without a raincoat, without a sweater, or with all of those items. So if we have digital platforms out there deleting, denying you and me access to data and information, which would then form the basis of our individual observations. And once that data is out of the equation, from the remaining selected data's meanings, associations, and relationships are then formed within our cognitive abilities. These then form the basis of the coming conclusions, often of what observation is fact or fiction. The news tells me I need a jacket today for rain, but I go outside. It's hot, it's dry, it's not even windy yet to indicate that a storm is coming in. So that observation, my own conclusions, override that bit of information that I received while watching the morning newscasts. So these facts and relationships between the differing sets of conclusion then constitute beliefs upon which our actions are then undertaken. And we have to apply this most appropriately, at least where we are in the timeline right now, to consider the same process upon which, one, how we decide and for whom to cast a vote. If there are active agendas deleting information, keeping narratives from trending, from taking form, then we will not make associations. We will not come to conclusions. We cannot decide accurately. And that, my friends, is the entire point. When we apply this to systems in their entirety, whether they're economic systems, educational systems, science systems, we have gone through a series of crises. And we'll just start with governments as a general, because they have taken the authority to oversee all of these other aspects of our lives, from education to health to even our welfare, as to what kind of fabrics we can bring into our home, what we can use on our bed linens. They have taken nearly complete control of those chemicals that we safely or dangerously, but we don't have the full set of information to decide which of those compounds are healthy to introduce to our body or even to brush our teeth with. So, crisis number one, a problem has arisen. We need to cut budgets. Costs continue to rise even though we've now cut budgets. Revenues fall emergency meetings end in conflicts because we have different points of view as to how to remedy crisis number one. First thing, though, to do is to go to those remedies which have been in place by those who came before us. The rainy day fund. Some states are very good at this, and others don't even know the meaning of the word of a rainy day fund. It's amazing the disparity between, say, the state of Illinois, who has to now borrow money at junk rates, versus states like Utah and Idaho, which can handle, which can weather a storm and the storms that have come. Even though there is stress, they haven't bounced a check or gone to the Fed to borrow $1 billion here or $1 billion there. All right, crisis one is resolved. All right, the economy builds back up. Now, because the issues that appeared in crisis one have not been resolved, they've been papered over because we had a rainy day fund. Crisis number two manifests, and so institutional defaults begin or fail to fix the problem. Recommendations either are too timid or too bold, and then the leadership remains divided. And those which did not have their suggestions appreciated, implemented, considered, retire. They leave. Their input was not considered. So they sense, they feel, they have been shown that there is no place in government for their opinion. All right, the conclusion ends up being modest reforms hailed as a long-term fix, reshuffled, and leadership is hopeful. Let's look at the Social Security Administration. Problem. Temporary fix, unify the budget, hide the problem. Crisis number three, budget shortfalls increase. Reforms are stymied by insider resistance, and then incompetent execution of those suggestions that were brought up either in crisis one or crisis two. So fearful of radical reform, the leaders opt to do more of what has failed spectacularly. Let's look at the Federal Reserve. If debt got us out of the problems of closing the gold window in August of 1971, we'll print some money. If more money solved the problem of the last financial crisis, the great financial crisis in 2008, then we'll print some more money. And now crisis number four stands before us. Forced layoffs now crush morale. Elizabeth Warren today talking about Disney and admonishing them for letting go 28,000 employees from their theme parks that have not been open since March. Why would Disney, even if they had a barrel of cash or two or three, considering they have bought $60 billion worth of their own stock, why would they continue, knowing where COVID is going, knowing that there are no solutions on the horizon? Why would they continue to staff amusement parks that have not been open in 6 months? It's ridiculous. You let the wait go. Despite it, and it's a risk of those employees. It's time to retool, retrain, and redeploy yourselves to another field of business, because apparently we can't solve COVID, therefore, or the common cold, so therefore we can't open the parks. Time to find a new career. So crisis four, forced the layoffs, crush morale, competent, continue to quit. They leave the organization, retire institutional momentum, and then is essentially run to a conclusion of failure. The organization ceases to function. There is no plan B, and systemic collapse is the result. How many companies that have been on the stock exchange, the NYSE or even the NASDAQ for that matter, no longer exist today? Or how many are on life support because someone has said, let's throw a little more money at the solution? From Sears to JCPenney, Macy's, the list goes on and on and on. Even the malls. There are so many malls that have lost every single one of their anchor tenants that to remain open is probably just a Hail Mary to hope to find some other purpose for that existing structure. Otherwise, it'll end up weeds, overgrown, and decrepit from falling into disrepair. So the same process applies to the many systems that are held in places by families, businesses, municipal, state, and of course, sovereign governments. If a full and accurate view of the landscape is withheld from those making decisions, ignored, or even rationalized away, then the view from the rose-colored glasses or continuing censorship, then the shattering, a collapse, or failure of this tightly held paradigm can only and inevitably occur. And since the loss is viewed as catastrophic by those at risk, they will fight with everything they have to stymie radical reforms. We're seeing that with the banks right now, as these other technologies like blockchain, like peer-to-peer lending, as these two innocuous but very powerful ideas come into the purview of those within the financial system, it becomes an existential threat. But as a crisis deepens, the default setting in an organization and conventional thinking is that incremental changes and reforms will eventually be enough for a generation. And I call this entirely natural default, seeing the delusional faith in these incremental changes because the faith isn't guided by history or the logic of causality. It's simply convenient and easy. And the thing is, nobody gets fired or demoted for agreeing to do more of what has failed spectacularly. So here we stand. Once again, she is admiring the view, the wave from afar. I have never seen anything like this, but not once, maybe twice, does the threat of what stands before her become real, until something inside the observer sends a chill up the back of the spine. And that chill comes from the core, comes from beyond the delusion of what we have been looking through to say, run. Run as hard and as fast as you can. We get lost in the mechanics, the details, the minutiae of the day while failing to comprehend, failing to see, even to look for that largest point of view. And again, in hindsight, it is plainly visible. And these individual situations may and honestly will always vary, yet we fail to comprehend, to willingly go out and explore, to see that information which has been willingly, aggressively hidden from us. And we have accepted, usually without question, that censorship. Because if you don't know, you don't question. And again, it's all plainly visible in hindsight. Once again, these individual situations will vary, but the existential threats manifest from the most unexpected sources, and always while we're distracted doing the little things in life. So, where are we? Who or where will the solutions to our varied, numerous, deep problems manifest from? Well, they come from those. Well, I'll just read it. Once again, do we accept that which is presented us, or do we take control by directing our own play, by writing our own finale? And this is what something else, some other power would like to do for us, is write it. Write the play, bring in their own cast of characters, and finish it. Has anybody heard of NESARA? The National Economic Security and Recovery Act. This, I think I may have come across it recently, like 10 years ago, because it's been around a while. It was a set of proposed economic reforms for the United States suggested during the 1990s by Harvey Francis Bernard. Bernard claimed that the proposals, which include replacing the income tax with a national sales tax, abolishing compound interest on secured loans, and then returning to a bimetallic currency, would result in 0% inflation and a more stable economy. The proposals were never introduced before Congress. If you look at the history of inflation in the United States, and in particular, the period from 1800 or even 1812, the end of that war, to 1913, you will find that prices were remarkably stable, almost frighteningly stable if you're not running a Ponzi scheme. If you are running a Ponzi scheme, it wouldn't have worked because there wasn't enough growth coming in to be able to allow for the misallocation of capital. So NESARA has since become better known as the subject of a cult-like conspiracy theory, doing the business as the dove of oneness. And that was actually claimed that it was passed in the past in additional provisions to the National Economic Security and Reformation Act and then suppressed by the George W. Bush administration. None of this I know whether it is true or not. But I do find the proposals, the ideas contained therein to be most fascinating. So what do we choose? All choices presented by the hidden hand and are usually presented as no choice at all, but simply as a necessity. And once again, in hindsight, it's all plainly visible. So Build Back Better. Is Joe Biden's actual campaign tagline launched 2 months ago? A speech by Boris Johnson of the UK? This one appears to have been in the oven for some time, just waiting for the right opportunity to share it with the public. This vision of the future with the global population. And so, who came up with the Build Back Better concept? Turnabout might be fair play considering that in 1988, Biden ran for president by plagiarizing a speech by a British politician, which ended up torpedoing his candidacy at the time. However, there doesn't seem to be an indication that Johnson parlayed this slogan from Biden. Rather, both politicians or their speechwriters might have swiped it from something called the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk and Reduction, adopted in March of 2015 at a UN conference in Japan. The Japanese delegation proposed Build Back Better as a concept in Chapter 7 of the book they presented at the Sendai conference. It was eventually incorporated into the framework and endorsed by the UN General Assembly. So in a nutshell, the idea is to restore the local infrastructure, culture, and environment to what it was before the natural disaster that disrupted them, only to make it more resilient. Now, if we think about Japan and natural disasters and processes which disrupted, that would have certainly been the Fukushima earthquake back in March 11 of 2011. It was a devastating 9+ on the Richter scale, if they're using the Richter scale anymore. I know they've got another magnitude scale, but nonetheless, it was a 9+ on either scale at that point in time. So from the Biden campaign trail, this Build Back Better is the official plan. Replace and reset everything with a global plan that will eventually supersede all sovereign laws, rights, and protections. COVID and the climate being ultimately the cover-up to surefire accomplish this long sought-after goal. And it reads well. It really does read well. Small businesses have had to jump through hoops, and many couldn't access relief that they needed. That's a given. They didn't have the manpower, the know-how to apply for these PPP loans or other aid that was presented them in the wake of COVID. Biden claims to ensure that the corporate America finally pays their fair share in taxes, puts their workers and communities first rather than their shareholders, and respects their workers' power and voice in the workplace. Companies didn't used to be able to buy their own stock, and certainly not go into debt to be able to do so. That is a rather recent change to SEC rules and laws. And I totally agree with that. There's no reason companies should be able to, like Disney, borrow, spend, redeploy profit, capital, potential reinvestment back into the stock market. It does not make sense. And Biden will help small businesses manage through the pandemic and recover so that millions of entrepreneurs can get back on their feet and carry this economy forward. And in my eyes, that also means a reworking of the tax law so that these small businesses are not taxed. It's such an onerous rate that you can never become or make that transition from a small company to a large company, which is also declaring need to pay greater taxes. There has to be a different way around this. The pandemic has also laid bare some unacceptable truths. Even before COVID, the Trump administration was pursuing economic policies that rewarded wealth over work and corporations over working families. Too many families were struggling to make ends meet, and too many parents were worried about the economic future for their children. So very true. Black and Latino Americans, Native Americans, immigrants, and women have never been welcomed as full participants in the economy. That is and isn't true. It depends on how you showed up, even though wage disparity exists, and that is something that must be addressed. Biden believes that this is no time to just build back to the way things were before, with the old economy's structural weaknesses and inequalities still in place. This is the moment to imagine and build a new American economy for families in the next generation, an economy where every American enjoys a fair return for the work and an equal chance to get ahead. An economy more vibrant and more powerful precisely because everybody will be cut in on the deal. Interesting terminology. So why now and not back in '08? And we still haven't addressed the AI, robots, healthcare, and most importantly, how global indebtedness will be addressed. How will we get around that pair of elephants now standing in a small room? And I have this fear, this anxiety that the debt will simply not be addressed until we get past the election. And the UN chief is warned of this unparalleled economic shock as a result of COVID-19. And we can go through the list of all of the programs upon which this Build Back Better has been a part of it. So, how do we get to the targets? How do we become more successful, profitable, while continuing to demonstrate inclusivity, tackling the climate crisis, and addressing human rights? These human rights issue, I think we can be an optimist, and I know we can get there, but it probably will not be with this particular Build Back Better plan. Because as we know and have been shown time and time again, there remains a hidden hand behind the scene. Behind all that lies the hidden hand forever guiding humanity into and through every war, every crisis, and every event in history, this one being no different. The hidden hand wants to build back better. But what do they want to build? Will it be through a war? Will it be through a pandemic that never stops? Will it be that our divisions, our poverty, our status, our education, our color, all of those will give the happy talk, will give protections too, but still keep the hand from revealing itself? And until control is taken from that hidden hand that has guided, that has controlled the banking families, financed both sides of the wars, commissioned by the royal family to put down the American Revolution, to finance the communist revolution in Russia, and probably is financing unrest in the United States of America today, destroyed Palestine to create Israel, behind 9/11 and all of the logistics that occurred on that day, the things that had to happen to the second for that play to have the finale that it has. So, what is to come is never hidden. Only the hand is hidden, meaning they will telegraph ahead of time exactly what they're going to do. On the spiritual realm and on the bigger play, they always tell us ahead of time what they're going to do. You don't know the details exactly, but in hindsight, it's ridiculously clear just exactly what happened and who pulled it off. So, even in Her Majesty's government in the UK, rethink, reskill, and reboot is now the 3-word motto. Her next job isn't in dancing. It isn't in her love or passion of what she would like to do with her life. It could be in cyber. And of course, she doesn't know it yet because the hand has not revealed to her what her task, what her purpose will be. So we have this agenda now that is slowly being revealed, rolled out to the public, will destroy the economy, and 2 things will be the cause. We have seen, all of us, the benefits of less economic activity, the clearer skies, the cleaner waters, the uncongested roads, the easier commute. We can see the upside of less and how environmentally that can be more. And this is the end game that they're pushing us towards. There are upsides to it, absolutely. But are we consulted? Are they honest about how we are to get there? And that's where I am. In a shocking claim, the president of Madagascar said that the WHO had offered a $20 million bribe to poison the COVID-19 cure. An herbal remedy called COVID-19 Organics made from Artemisia can cure coronavirus in patients within 10 days, said the president. We can't have that. We can't have cures, not yet. We're not to that point where we need people up and mobile. We can't have hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine itself out there showing people that they can treat this thing for themselves. That is going to be Build Back Better. But we haven't been shown what's beyond what we're building, what we'll be giving our energy to, or simply what we'll be surrendering and traveling less, communicating less, consuming less. What are we giving up? The other option is a monetary reform proposal. And this guy, Harvey Francis Bernard, a Louisiana State graduate in systems philosophy and an engineering consultant and teacher, created this proposal during the late 1980s and early 90s. He printed 1,000 copies of his proposal titled, appropriately, Draining the Swamp, Monetary and Fiscal Policy Reform, published in 1996. He sent copies to members of Congress, believing it would pass quickly simply on its merits, based on the theory that debt is the number one economic factor inhibiting the growth of the economy, and that compound interest is the number one moral evil and the reason for debt. Bernard made several other attempts during the 90s to draw political attention to the problems he saw in the U.S. economy and suggested economic recovery proposals based on the root causes be determined. And after these did not succeed, he decided in 2000 to release the proposal into the public domain and published it on the internet. So, if it seemed so clear to him that it would be readily adopted because this plan, these concepts, these bullet points would be for the betterment of humankind, then we know it wouldn't be adopted by the hand. They had another agenda for humanity. Forgiveness of credit card debt, mortgage, and other bank debt due to illegal banking and government activities. Is the Federal Reserve Act legal? Is it operating outside of constitutional law? And therefore, is the income tax also its primary means of revenue increasing also illegal? So this abolishes the IRS, creates a flat tax, non-essential, new items only sales tax revenue for the government. Obviously, then government would have to shrink. And in my eyes, this is the simplest way to raise revenue. You can abolish the IRS. You can have tax receipts go from the register into the government's coffers the night businesses close. We have a blockchain for that. We have a way to audit that. We have a way to hold both sides accountable. Returns to constitutional law, establishes new presidential congressional elections within 120 days after this announcement, monitors elections and prevents illegal election activities or special interest groups, creates a new U.S. Treasury currency backed by gold, silver, and platinum. And I would probably throw in cryptocurrencies at this particular point because they are of limited supply. And it would behoove nations. We're certainly seeing what Fidelity Investments today said. It would be wise for companies and individuals to hold 5% of their assets in Bitcoin. 5%. This is a first time we've had 3 major companies now begin to deploy their cash assets into cryptocurrencies to get it outside of this old banking system. So it creates a new U.S. Treasury currency backed by these assets, returns to constitutional law versus, say, admiralty law, initiates a new U.S. Treasury banking system aligned with constitutional law, eliminates the Federal Reserve, restores financial privacy. Can you imagine privacy? Retains all judges and attorneys, retrains, all judges and attorneys in constitutional law, ceases all aggressive U.S. government and military actions worldwide, and of course, without the need to keep other systems, other nations, other companies inside the dollar system, you can let go and let them flourish in their own way. So maybe it's fanciful, maybe it's a fairy tale. But would it really be so bad? And why? Why would we want to continue the system the way it is? And then there's some character on Twitter, and he calls this the long game, to free ourselves from an evil cabal that has been running the show for hundreds of years. First, the old system has to be dismantled, then we, humanity, must decide what type of system we want to replace it. History, money, laws, and values all need to be rewritten. And that, for me, is the big thing. To rewrite, to reimagine, and to put our energy into another system, not to prop up the one after the fourth crisis. Crisis 1, 2, 3, 4, same remedy. Crisis continues, problem gets worse. At some point, you've got to withdraw the energy from it and invest in a different outcome. The golden rule. Each single religion, belief system has their own golden rule. And everything you do, everything should you do, you will find in this. Do nothing to hurt others. Do nothing to offend others, as you would not want to be offended. The success of your neighbor and their losses will be you as if they were your own. On and on and on. This is a very, very common theme. Do no harm. And I enjoyed defining this last night. It was considered the best photo of the century. A lioness and her cub were crossing the savannah, but the heat was excessive, and the cub, being young, was in great difficulty walking. An elephant realized the cub would die and carried him in his trunk to a pool of water, walking beside his mother. And we call them wild animals. When you can see the distress, the suffering, the challenges in others, and move beyond the greed, the lust, the anger, the frustration, all of those energies that have been pounded into us through music, through movie, through entertainment, through book, through never being presented another option but the death of the problem. Gunshot, abuse, that's what is presented us through the media. Will we get to the other side? Will we be able to see and understand the golden rule and apply it in money, in relationships, in education, in our own imaginations? So when we get to another perspective on Monday, I want to talk about how nations run out of food and what must be done now to prepare for what appears to be a long, long, dark winter ahead. Project Veritas came across a group of folks who, if they don't get their way with their election, have promised to make life a bloody hell for those on the other side. Promised. So we have to anticipate that those kind of cells, you can call them sleeper cells if you'd like, will be activated regardless of who wins or loses next month. And would that impact our already stretched food systems? When there's sabotage, when there's very long supply chains, when we have weather interruptions of food, this needs to be a priority while we still have peace around the world. All right, a couple of other shows here on Metadime. The Coffee Break Show with Vicki Helm, weekdays at 11 o'clock Mountain. Tracy Wilson with her Unlocked show on Tuesdays, Thursdays, also 6 o'clock Mountain or 10 o'clock Brisbane time, because, she's a New Zealander Aussie, a Kiwi. And then, of course, this show Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 o'clock. So that's kind of where we are. I know that there are challenges, great, great challenges ahead. But as we started the show off, you and I have been sent here at this time for this and these series of events, that we have the insight, the potential, the strength to see ourselves through, our families through, our friends through, and ultimately, depending on the responsibilities given before you were born, maybe even a greater population. All right, that's it for this week's Another Perspective. I'll catch you on Monday as we talk about food and how life gets very, very difficult with an empty stomach. All right, see you then. In the meantime,